Lentils are the humble pearls of the earth. You need a second glance to see this tiny pulse's potential as a miracle of nutrition.
We call it malka, we call it masoor. We eat it whole and we eat it shelled, but it is at the heart of all dishes.
Lentils are proven to lower blood sugar and may even prevent cancer. They are eaten mainly in poorer countries with a fast-growing population.
We eat lentils all year long. Without them, we're nothing.
You can easily figure out that human population in 40 years went up 80%. In the same 40 years, lentil consumption went up 350%. Therefore, everybody wants to eat more lentils.
How can the future need for lentils be fulfilled? The fields are not getting any bigger, and lentils grow in regions that are severely affected by climate change.
Climate is changing. Our crop is experiencing more frequent droughts, more heat. For that, we have to breed varieties which are having resistance to drought and heat.
We have to develop technologies that are accessible and affordable by farmers. The most important affordable technology is high-yielding and disease-resistant varieties.
Scientists worldwide are rising to the challenge, breeding high-yielding plants for those areas where lentils didn't grow properly in the past. They penetrate deep into the genetic material of the tiny legume, while others put their faith in ancient varieties. Making the wonder of the lentil accessible for humankind has become a race against climate change and demographic growth. In the Ethiopian region of Oromia, conditions are perfect for growing lentils, which are traditionally part of the local cuisine. Moderate heat during the first growth period, followed by heat and dry weather, ensure the seeds are ready for harvest by November. Demikesh Tekle Johannes is a peasant farmer in the area of Kimpichu, and, like her ancestors, has been farming lentils her entire life, until a natural catastrophe destroyed her entire crop.
The lentils were blooming so beautifully that I asked people to take off their shoes before walking through the field. I removed the weeds myself to make sure no one else would walk over them. But from one day to the next, rust came over the plants and turned everything to ash. Everyone was affected.
Many farmers abandoned their lands and moved away. But how did Demikesh manage to stay? Lentil plants can endure far drier climates than other legumes like chickpeas, for example. That way, they can provide a stable food source in those regions where climate change has led to frequent drought. But in Gimbichu, climate change also brought the occasional rain, and with it, various fungal diseases. Among them, the so-called rust, which destroyed the lentil harvest of 2005 on over 20,000 hectares. Demikesh too struggled to keep her family fed. As the time approached for sowing new seeds, agriculture researchers offered to help the Ethiopian government in the form of the newly developed rust-resistant lentil variety, Alamein. The seeds of this robust and high-yielding variety are yellow rather than red-orange, like the traditional Ethiopian lentil. For this reason, among others, Demikesh's neighbours initially rejected the new crop, until they saw the plentiful, blooming plants.
All the farmers came to see my field. They said, "A woman has outdone us." I wasn't home at the time, but when I came back, loads of people had gathered. I said, "I'm a woman. Why are you coming to me? I should be the one going to your fields and learning from you men." I teased them, saying, "It's not proper for men to learn from a woman." They still remember that day.
Much needed help for Gimbichu's peasant farmers came from this testing field in Debre Zayit, roughly 30 miles southeast of the capital, Addis Ababa. Luckily, the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research, EIAR, had already been experimenting with disease-resistant lentils for several years, with resources provided by the worldwide organization ICARDA. Here, legume farmer Milian Eshete tested the resistant lentils from the international breeding program. Through further crossbreeding with local strains, 2 completely new and rust-resistant crops could be developed.
The rust disease doesn't break out every year, but in intervals of 2 to 5 years. But once it hits, it can destroy an entire harvest, like it did 2 years ago in the Newari region and in North Shoa, affecting everyone farming the old, local lentils. The improved alamine strains, however, were once again unaffected. Without them, all local farmers would have lost their harvest to the rust, plunging the area into a severe food crisis.
The new and resistant yellow lentil has now been accepted into the kitchens of Gimbichu. Demekesh is using them to cook the traditional misawat and swears by the lentil dish's healing powers.
Yes, lentils are very healthy. They're very popular. They're good for the stomach and the heart, and they make you strong. They have many advantages.
And sure enough, her lentil puree, together with some traditional injera flatbread, adds up to a complete meal. The body breaks down the protein in the grain and lentils, creating essential amino acids. The amino acids created by such a lentil and grain dish are exactly those 9 recommended for human nutrition. Both food products, as well as lentils and whole grain rice, complement each other perfectly. Meat, which can be unaffordable for people in poorer countries, is rendered obsolete. Perhaps that is why this combination can be found in the cuisine of all lentil farming cultures. Our modern cooking lentil, the Lens culinaris, is extremely versatile and colourful. And yet it is mainly descended from one wild lentil strain from the Middle East, the Lens orientalis. Thanks to cave excavations in Greece and Morocco, we know that lentil dishes go back as far as 13,000 years. There are 6 types in total. People in the Middle East started cultivating the wild Lens orientalis around 6000 BC. The late Bronze Age saw the lentils being introduced to Egypt and Central Europe. A short time after that, they reached India and the Mediterranean basin. Today, the Lens culinaris is grown mainly in areas with little humidity and mostly barren soil. It's a plant of the dry regions and the dry season. The lentil plant grows to about 20 inches in height and can flourish only away from excessive moisture and fertile soil. Exposed to such conditions, the crop would be prone to developing too many leaves and only very few seed pods. Like all pulses, the lentil is a pulpillinaceous flower. Every seed pod contains approximately 1 or 2 lentils, of either yellowish-brown colour, like the common lentil, green-speckled, like the French puy lentil, or the small brown variety, like the mountain lentil. Some varieties appear marbled, or in the case of the beluga lentil, black and round like caviar. Once their husk is removed, the lentils are orange-red or yellow. All these varieties are small energy bundles and, when cooked, contain around 25% protein. The only legume to contain more protein is the soybean. Others, like peas and most beans, fall short. Additionally, lentils are rich in fibre, minerals, trace minerals and vitamins. In the far north of the planet, one place holds almost the world's entire genetic lentil range, the Global Seed Vault. It was established in 2008 and is located at the edge of the former mining town of Longyearbyen. It is there, in the area of Spitsbergen, that the biggest part of our agricultural heritage lies dormant at a constant -18 degrees Celsius. The Norwegian government supports the World Trust's project for crop plants.
Behind these doors, you have 865,000 varieties of seeds from absolutely all over the world. It's the product of the hard work of farmers for 13,000 years, and it's also the future of agriculture. And you know, when we lose genetic material around the globe in the real world for reasons of war or natural disasters, it's just very, very comforting to know that we can retrieve the material here and start afresh and produce the food that the world needs.
Scientists call this gene vault a black box. Unlike other seed vaults, the stores in Spitsbergen are not used for research purposes. They are safe kept for times of need, like in 2015, when ICARDA first requested material from the seed vault. Part of that request was lentil germplasm that was meant to establish a new gene bank in Morocco. Due to the ongoing war in Syria, ICARDA's central gene bank in Aleppo can only function at a limited capacity. Luckily, a full copy of its stores was transferred to the vault in Spitsbergen a few years ago.
At that time, nobody could imagine the implications of a potential war. Now, ICARDA needs to multiply these seeds. Even though ICARDA is still active in Aleppo in order to respond to all the seed requests, we cannot multiply the seeds in Syria. That's why we need to come and retrieve the seeds from our safety duplication here in Svalbard, because it's the most fresh and the most complete safe duplication set that we have deposited.
And so, in September of 2015, an unremarkable vehicle starts its journey. The cargo is made up of around 2,000 old regional lentil varieties, as well as wild strains, many of which are already extinct in their region of origin. Its goal is the new ICARDA Centre for International Lentil Research in Morocco. About half a year later, in April of 2016, the seeds from Spitsbergen have grown into plants on the test fields. ICARDA, which is mainly funded by wealthier industrial nations, presides over the international mandate for research and improvement of dry region crops, including the lentil.
6 multiplied by 2.
2 hours' drive outside Morocco's capital Rabat, the foundation for a new gene bank is flourishing.
The mission of the gene bank is to send seeds to different requesters according to their needs. So to do this, we have to multiply the seed quantities that we retrieved from Svalbard to make our seed lots bigger and to characterize the material and to know the breeders, for example, what they really need for their research.
This is the place where traits are discovered. And here discovered and there they are deployed. In the breeding program, these traits discovered here and deployed there. Before we go for crossing, we further evaluate under replicated trials so that we understand that the trait is stable, uniform and distinguished. These 3 traits are very important for me to incorporate into my breeding line.
Somewhere among the 2,000 varieties of lentils stored in Spitsbergen are likely traits and resistances that one day will urgently be needed. But how can scientists introduce new traits into old lentil strains? In the past, farmers simply used to pick the seeds of their strongest plants and use them for their next harvest. Furthermore, only the plants that were most able to adapt would survive long enough to be chosen. This natural and human process of selection led to local varieties. Lentil plants originally were unfit for crossbreeding. Like all lentil flowers, those in the fields of Morocco are bisexual and thus able to pollinate themselves. Only about 1% of the flowers end up being pollinated by insects or strong winds. How then do scientists trick nature into allowing the lentils to be crossbred? If a lentil from the gene bank shows definite traits on the fields, for example a resistance to rust, it is moved to ICARDA's research greenhouses. Here, Shiv Kumar Agrawal is working on transferring the crop's beneficial characteristic to another high-yielding variety. This synthetic crossbreeding is called hybridization. It's the first step in every lentil breeding process, or even that of every self-pollinating plant. Inside the lentil's flower, there are female carpels and male stamen. In order to improve a lentil variety, scientists remove the male parts shortly before the pollen mature. That way, self-pollination can be prevented, and a solely female flower is created. In the next step, the flower of the second variety, the variety which has a desirable property, is opened and used to pollinate the female flower, which then proceeds to ripen and produce seeds. The developed seed is planted and grows into the first hybrid plant, and perhaps into the first generation of a new variety.
After 3 generations, we put the population of the plant into rust place where there is a lot of rust. So the one which is susceptible, all those plants will killed. Only those which is having rust resistance, they will survive. Then only seed is harvested from that particular plant, not from the other one. We take 2 selection criteria. One, that it must have the characteristic which is there in the female plants. And then we just look for the resistance which we brought from the other one. So the plant which is having the looking like female but having rust resistance, through that is screening, and then that's how we fix that particular female plant having rust resistance.
Back at the ICARDA test fields near the Moroccan capital Rabat, plant pathologists assist the breeders in developing the resistant strains. Syed Ahmed Kamal and his colleague are closing in on destructive lentil diseases. So far, lab work in greenhouses can't yet replace the research opportunities offered by the fields. However, the Ethiopian researcher will need his laboratory in order to determine which disease has damaged the crops on the fields and how it has affected the plants. Most interesting, of course, are those which have survived completely unharmed, since they may carry the desired resistant strain.
Sometimes if the variety farmers are growing is not resistant to the disease, they can lose totally their crop. This is, for example, the outbreak of rust in Ethiopia, where thousands of hectares of land was totally killed. So this is how, and then that's why we are targeting both yield and disease resistance are very critical in the Icarda breeding program.
This is how Kemal and his colleagues save entire harvests in their lab in Rabat, securing a modest wealth for the poorer families in the dry regions. The efficiency of certain chemicals is also being tested by applying different standard fungicides to several petri dishes, all containing the same fungal spores. Kemal measures how much the fungus has grown despite the chemical treatment. In that way, he can determine which substance is most suited for which lentil variety. Chemical treatment, however, has always been second to crossbreeding on Icarda's list of priorities.
Our major objective is to develop resistant varieties to poor farmers, because if you add pesticides or chemicals to them, they cannot buy. So that's why our major emphasis is to develop varieties resistant to major diseases, so that our poor farmers can benefit. And also it's important for the environment.
The extreme weather conditions that climate change has introduced also affect the lentil plants directly, most of all dryness and high temperatures. The infrared camera measures the temperatures on the leaves, giving Icarda researchers an insight into how well certain crops can cope with the heat. This septometer measures the light beams the plant used for photosynthesis. The less this light radiates off the plants, the more sunlight has been processed. But how can researchers determine how much dryness the new crossbreeds can withstand, and when? The answer lies in time-displaced planting.
Many times we get only terminal droughts. In that conditions, if I have planted in different dates of planting, then the first experiment which I planted, it might escape the drought. The second one may get terminal drought. The third experiment will get drought at the time of flowering. So I can test that, okay, my plant or my variety is having tolerance at different stages to drought or not.
Hidden beneath the soil, the small lentil plant has an extraordinary ability. It can absorb nitrogen from the air and, with the help of a bacteria, store it in its small root nodules. In order to keep these fragile constructs intact, the scientists remove the soil with the greatest care. They're trying to determine how many such nodules the plant has developed. This special trait is crucial, especially for peasant farmers who can't afford to use artificial fertilizer. The more nodules a new variety develops, the more nitrogen remains in the soil, where it acts as a natural fertilizer. On average, that amounts to 90 kilograms per hectare. This improvement of the soil is one of the reasons why the farmers in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan introduced lentils into their 4-year crop rotation in the 1970s. Lentils can be planted on fields that would otherwise remain barren for an entire year. only the very few months without frost give the farmers in this prairie a chance to work their fields. And even though the small legume is rarely eaten in this part of the world, Saskatchewan has become the planet's lentil treasury.
They are, I guess, maybe a poor man's protein. You know, you look at it, there's a lot of the world that it's their cheapest source of protein. But again, as farmers, you know, it's great to think we're doing that, but we are doing it for economics. We're providing, they have a need, they need protein. We have the ability to grow them, and so in the market we are able to meet, and we're able to make money, and they have food. So it's probably the best way to look at it, it's win-win.
In 2016, the province's farmers harvested about 3.2 tons of lentils, worth almost 2 billion euros, almost entirely for the purpose of export. By now, more than half the world's traded lentils come from the prairie of Saskatchewan. But why?
Saskatchewan had a couple things go right. Farmers formed Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, which collects money to invest in lentil research. We're successful in getting scientists that were really good at their job. So we have a very strong lentil breeding program.
In this breeding program, the American lentil varieties have been perfected to produce a higher yield, as well as being harvestable by machines. Furthermore, the Canadian scientists have tackled the weed problem, which affects lentil farmers worldwide and usually has to be met with painstaking manual labour. The fields of Saskatchewan now almost exclusively produce the specifically engineered Clearfield lentils.
Well, the chemicals kill the weeds and don't hurt the crop. I mean, the thing with the Clearfield variety, the lentils have, by natural processes, have a gene in them that allows them to process IMI sprays. Doesn't kill them, yet it'll kill the weeds. So it just increases your ability to clean up the crop with herbicides. You know, so it works out really well. You get a higher yielding crop, which ultimately, at the end of the day, higher yielding probably means cheaper food for someone. It's kind of a choice. Do you want cheap food, which most people want, or do you want what you considered chemical-free food? They're both safe. There's no question about it that, you know, conventionally grown crops are safe. It just comes down to price.
And this is how the wide and controversial use of chemicals, as well as the introduction of new lentil varieties, have created a huge lentil industry in Saskatchewan. All the lentils growing on Canadian fields hail from Bert Vandenberg's breeding program. This makes him something like the father of half the world's lentil trade. The lentil industry, especially large-scale farmers, are funding his professorship in lentil research. Numbers in the 8 digits are invested on a yearly basis to keep the University of Saskatchewan's breeding program running. Phytotrone chambers allow the researchers to simulate time and temperature as needed, which is crucial, since the land outside only sees 4 frost-free months per year. Like in the Icada test fields in Morocco, the creation of a new variety starts with hybridization. But where, not too long ago, it could take 9 or 10 years for a stable variety to be established, the process can now be sped up by several years.
We can do that with using smaller containers, applying a little bit of stress. We can speed up the life cycle. We've also, for research purposes, we've also gone to a system where we can rescue the seeds at about 18 days after pollination, treat them for a couple of days in a tissue culture flask, and then we can plant them directly, so we save another 30 days on the life cycle. We don't have to wait for the seeds to dry down. They immediately start forming the next generation.
Like any other living thing, a lentil plant's main function is to reproduce. By applying stress, which the plant can only barely survive, they manage to grow a large number of small plants with quickly developing seeds. With the strictest speed breeding, a tiny plant is grown that will yield exactly 1 seed within only 2.5 weeks. Genetic engineering is another way of speeding up the breeding process, making use of so-called molecular markers.
The DNA molecule is like a zipper, right? So on a zipper you have two halves and they fit together nicely, and that's, in DNA, that would be like chemically bonded together. In the case of your zipper, once in a while you find an annoying little thing where it doesn't match, and so you always see that spot where the zipper is not fitting. That happens in DNA too, and it's very characteristic. It reproduces itself. So if you know the genetic code, you can always tell where the zipper doesn't match. And that's what we do with a molecular marker. In the case of, let's say, herbicide tolerance, if you find a plant that looks this way when the zipper is on one side, or this way when the zipper has the other half, you can always trace it.
It's these small irregularities within the DNA that allow us to determine molecular markers with great accuracy. To find the markers, scientists compare the genotype, the DNA, of different lentil varieties. Here they look for the irregularities, that is, the markers which are like signposts for them, pointing to specific traits. They only occur if the DNA contains specific genes. This way, a molecular marker always indicates that a specific trait is available in the genes. Thanks to this genetic engineering, one lentil kernel is enough for Bert Vandenberg's colleague Kristen Brett to anticipate a breed's properties before even planting it. She removes part of the husk and extracts a minuscule sample of the cotyledon, the future seed leaf. A liquid allows her to extract the DNA from the sample. She wants to find out whether the seed could produce a plant resistant to weed killers, a clear-filled lentil. The scientists must be careful to preserve this trait while further developing the clear-filled variety. Only a small part of the DNA is inspected during this process, the part that contains the molecular marker. Scientific progress is at a point where the entire generation of a breeding line can be quickly tested in regards to one trait.
That makes it a lot quicker because we can know before we put seeds in the ground what to expect, and we aren't wasting as much time on individuals that have no hope of having the correct traits that we're interested in. And so we can spend more time and more resources on the individuals that do have at least some of the traits we're interested in, and then we have markers for, and then the rest of it we can do in the field.
A computer program provides proof of the results. Every symbol represents a seed. The blue ones will be disposed of. The green ones are only partly tolerant of herbicides, but the yellow ones are those that Bert Vandenberg and his team will later breed and observe in the university's test fields. In 2016, Canadian scientists succeeded in sequencing the first complete lentil genome. They have, however, no intention to artificially manipulate it. They want to apply their knowledge to finding more precise molecular markers, and maybe even rediscover some of the lost traits of the wild lentils and plant them in their fields.
There's, for instance, disease resistances, perhaps different nutritional profiles that are available within the wild species. So it's genetic variability that we don't actually have within the cultivated species. And by understanding the relationship between the two species at a molecular level, you can better track what is happening and maybe get rid of the scary parts that would come from wild lentils. For instance, they shatter, they have dormancy issues. If we can identify the regions that have the bad characteristics, then we can avoid those and at the same time bring in some of that new variability.
This is how the gene bank's stored variety of lentil breeds can help make cultivated breeds more robust. These plants might one day ensure a food source for those areas where climate change has brought about rapid changes. A little outside Saskatoon, the high-yielding lentils from the prairie are being husked. During the harvest season, the farmers hire huge trucks and drivers in order to bring the lentils directly to the mill. Prior to every delivery, a sample determines the grade of contamination by stones and bits of plant. This, in turn, determines the price. The fully automatic husking mill's owner is working closely with the university's research team. He hopes to find a way of repurposing those parts of the lentil that are left over after the husking process.
The seed coat, it has about 22 antioxidants. We can potentially move that into pharmaceutical industry to try to utilize that product. The germ that's inside the lentil, which is only 1.5% by weight, is 69% protein, and we have also figured out ways to recover this product, and we have achieved values in the lab of up to 45% protein. So there's many things that can be done that are currently not being done with every piece of the lentil.
In India, the country second only to China in terms of population, lentils are traditionally eaten peeled. Often the peeled lentils are even split in two in order to speed up the cooking process. Without their shell, lentils are cooked within only 10 minutes, and thus probably the world's healthiest fast food. This, among other things, is what makes the lentil so interesting for food-conscious Europeans. At the Biofach, the world's leading exhibition on ecologically grown foods, one thing becomes clear. Lentils are the new trend. For the vegan community, they represent a food source which is rich in protein and therefore a valuable part of nutrition. As a result, a whole industry is trying to find new ways of processing the little legume. At the beginning of 2016, Vandana Shiva, holder of the Right Livelihood Award, introduced her new book on pulses. It's a plea for reintroducing lentils into small farming structures and for their consumption.
You don't have to punish yourself if you don't eat meat. There's a richer, diverse diet waiting, where the proteins come from pulses and not from protein of soya fed to animals and reduced to 1/100th the value in meat.
Vandana Shiva's organisation is called Navadanya, which means 9 seeds. It promotes the organic farming of traditional crops all over India, including lentils. Shiva sees a great danger in importing lentils from Canada.
We are talking about a graph that will keep growing. Not only will the better pulses organically produced disappear, but the dependency will be so huge that you need one bad year of climate, and you're going to have an absolute disaster. So we've got to get it right on pulses and lentils to get it right on everything else. And how can a poison-sprayed field be called clean field? This double speak must end.
Vandana Shiva is a quantum physics graduate who grew up in Dehradun, the capital of the West Indian province of Uttarakhand. Here, at the foot of the Himalayas, Shiva created her own organic farm. 30 years on, her organisation Navadanya is applying specifically those scientific discoveries which defy popular practice. The organisation's aim is to create an ecological counter-proposal to challenge the trend of industrialised farming. This is why old lentil varieties are still farmed here, without the use of chemicals. Vandana Shiva is a harsh critic of the Indian agrarian reform, the so-called Green Revolution. Its main aim was to bring rice and wheat monocultures to the fields of India, but it's led to the disappearance of local pulses like the lentil. This loss of one of their most traditional food sources has created a growing supply gap, which in turn allowed the Canadian lentil industry to develop. Vandana Shiva's farm presides over a small community seed bank. These seed banks are at the heart of the Indian organic farming movement, with around 120 locations all over the country. Local varieties of rice, grain and pulses are stored here, so that they can be returned to the farmers, who can then once again breed them.
The difference between seeds bred for chemicals and a commodity trade globally, and seeds bred by farmers with nature, is first, farmers breed for diversity. They never breed a variety to be sold all over the world. They breed 10 varieties for their farm, the wet part of the farm, the dry part of the farm, the part where they will grow this lentil and somewhere else they'll grow that parts. So diversity is farmers breeding.
While large seed banks only rarely plant their samples, these local varieties are meant to permanently evolve on the fields. The idea is to expose them to local weather conditions year after year, so that they have a chance to adapt more successfully.
The thing about climate change is we don't know how it will change. We know it is changing. We don't know when a drought will come. We don't know when too much rain will come. Problem is, at best, an engineer of a plant through genetic engineering or a breeder for industrial chemical inputs will change one or two traits. Yield, maybe drought, but next year might be a year of heavy flooding. That means your variety is going to fail more often. Uniformity is a recipe for failure.
A lot of traditional knowledge has been lost over the course of the Indian agrarian reform. Additionally, many new discoveries have been introduced into organic farming. The Navadanya farm runs an information and education centre where farmers from all over the country, especially women, can learn about diverse crop rotation, for example.
Here we do breeding courses, participatory and evolutionary breeding. The top scientists come and work with the top farmers so that the idea that farmers are brainless and brain dead can be overcome. And we respect the farmer's intelligence like we respect a scientist's intelligence. And wherever farmers are committed and willing, we are ready for support. So now we're working in more than 22 states, more than 1 million farmers, hundreds of thousands of varieties saved. And we've also helped farmers shape and create a market for diversity for their organic products.
Lentils are one of India's most important staple foods. Here, in Vandana Shiva's homeland, they're eaten on a daily basis by a majority of the population. Prepared as so-called dal and eaten with flatbread, they provide an ideal diet for poorer people here. But while the Navadanya organization is working hard to bring the lentil back to the fields, the supply gap here, and in many parts of the world, is still enormous. The United Nations declared 2016 the Year of Pulses. ICARDA joined the effort by holding a conference in Marrakesh. The Palais de Congrès becomes the meeting place for the crème de la crème of lentil research. Everyone here has made it their career to work in the labs and fields to find a solution to world hunger. The aim is no longer to only feed the people, but also to breed new lentil varieties that could tackle the hidden hunger, malnutrition.
If we can improve the iron and zinc content, these are the two major micronutrients which are very much deficit in the food system in that part, Eastern India, Bangladesh, Nepal. And if we can enhance that iron and zinc content in lentil seed through genetic means, and we give that varieties to the farmers, then definitely it has an added value, more than 30-35% more iron and zinc content we are looking for, at least.
West Bengal in the east of India is one of the most densely populated and poverty-stricken regions in the country. Here too, this new trend is hoping to bring an end to malnutrition, which affects mainly women and children. Again, ICADA is working closely with local scientists, further improving altered lentil varieties from the international breeding program by farming them on test fields near the capital, Kolkata. The result is a variety of lentil breeds that have not only adapted to local conditions, but are also rich in zinc and iron. Kohinoor Mandal is a farmer from the village of Maheshwarpur, and he's just harvested such a new lentil variety. However, the fact that these lentils are more nutritious is of little interest to her. It's another new trait which makes this crop so interesting to her and the other farmers of the village. Instead of the usual 120 days, this new lentil variety takes only 90 days to mature. This means that the rice fields around the village, which used to lie barren until the next season, can now be put to use.
We never used to farm them. Instead, we had rice, rapeseed, sesame or jute, but nothing else. Since this is the first year we're planting the lentils, we can't yet say whether or not we'll end up with a profit. But this is something we're doing only for us. We're not selling the crop. We eat lentils 12 months a year. Without them, we're nothing.
Now, finally, Kohinoor no longer needs to buy the lentils she uses for her daily dal meal. And yet, she can still farm all the crops she used to grow before. Like in Vandana Shiva's organic movement, more diversity has been introduced into the crop rotation by different means. Additionally, Kohinoor now provides extra iron and zinc for her family with every meal. Speeding up the growth process has brought about immense change. But how?
So what we do through crossbreeding, the early type material, crossing early type into early type to develop more super early type. And we got success to do that. Farmers, they will get an extra pulse crop for their household nutritional security. And straw from lentils is valuable animal feed. And also when they grow lentil, their soil is also getting benefited. Its fertility will be increased.
Breeding projects that focus on the increase of micronutrients can now be found in many countries. Even the traditional Moroccan lentil soup in the streets of Marrakesh may soon be even more nutritious than it already is. This way, specifically developed varieties can help to fight malnutrition in all those areas where lentils are a traditional food source. In Marrakesh, the day, and with it the International Conference of Lentil Researchers, is coming to an end. High above the famous marketplace of Jama al-Fna, the leading lentil scientists have met up for a meal in one of the numerous restaurants. More than 75% of the lentils traded worldwide come from Bert Vandenberg's and Shiv Kumar Agrawal's breeding program. Whether the harira, the traditional Moroccan lentil soup they're eating, has been cooked using lentils from their labs or regional crops can no longer be determined. But whether engineered or traditional, the researchers agree on the certain superpowers of the small lentil.
People that knew me, they said, in Ethiopia, before a wedding, the bride and the groom are fed lentils for a week. Right? Because it increases your sexual prowess. That's what the belief is. And it's not just in Ethiopia. You find the same tradition in Sri Lanka, which is not even a producing country, and you find it in North India, you find it in several places.
Lentil used to be eaten by the kings.
Right.
kings, you know. It was the food for kings, because, so that they used to have 100 wives and other things, you know.
In Ethiopia, the country of the lentil wedding dish, scientific research has helped Demekesh Tekle-Yohannes to become a wealthy farmer in her own right. The high-yielding and rust-resistant Alaman crop has not only provided enough food for her children, but also money to invest. She's built herself a new house with new furniture and could even afford to send her children to better schools. She's now also the proud owner of a small herd of cattle.
To be able to buy 3 oxen to plough the field is a big deal. For me, it's the same as being able to buy a plane. Can a poor man buy a plane? No, he can't. But that's how precious they are to me. It's like owning millions. I have a new house and can afford to hire some help. I couldn't wish for anything more, and I'm very grateful.
Scientists have opened the door to a better life for her and her family. Together they explore different paths to bring the lentil back to our fields. And it may just take all these different paths to feed the world's growing population in times of climate change.